They called her a scammer. Right there at the counter, in front of everyone. Told her to leave. That she didn't belong. But then the screen above the lobby flickered to life, and everything changed. Her son's name, her son's face, appeared in a highlight reel celebrating the bank's top corporate clients. Anthony Bradford. CEO. Philanthropist. Visionary. But before that moment, Helen Bradford had only walked in with quiet dignity and a check. At 62, she moved with the kind of grace that couldn't be bought or taught, just passed down, generation to generation. Her lavender dress, the one she usually saved for Sunday service, was soft at the shoulders and neatly pressed. Gold earrings, nothing flashy. Her gray hair was pinned back in a tidy bun. There was care in every part of how she presented herself. The envelope in her purse held a check her son had sent just days ago. $9,800, just a little help, he'd called it. She'd mentioned a broken water heater on a phone call, and by the time she finished speaking, Anthony was already asking where to mail the check. Helen had never liked asking for help. But Anthony always reminded her it wasn't charity, it was gratitude. The bank was only 10 minutes from her house in Bevo Mill, a neighborhood in South St. Louis where she'd lived for decades. The branch used to be a credit union, she remembered. Same red bricks, same green carpet, just more screens now, and fewer people she recognized. She approached the counter calmly. 2 tellers were on duty. One was helping an elderly man with a wire transfer. The other, a young woman with long nails and a bored expression, tapped away at her screen. Helen waited patiently. Then, with a polite smile, she said, "Good morning. I'd like to deposit this." She carefully took out the envelope, unfolded the check, and slid it across the counter. The teller gave it a quick glance, then paused. Her brow furrowed. "Is this yours?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "Yes, ma'am," Helen replied, gently. "It's from my son. He sent it yesterday." The teller picked up the check like it was contaminated. "Do you have an account here?" "I've had one for years." She typed Helen's name into the system. Something she saw on the screen made her eyebrows lift. "Anthony Bradford," she said slowly, sounding out the name like it tasted strange. "And who exactly is that?" Helen straightened her back. "My son. What does he do?" "He owns a renewable energy company. Bradford Solutions." The teller let out a skeptical breath. "This is almost $10,000. I need to verify it." "You can call him," Helen offered, reaching for her phone. "I can give you his number." But the woman didn't reach for the phone. She just stared. Then, without warning, she took the check and fed it into the shredder. The grinding noise filled the silence. Helen froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "Excuse me," she whispered. "If it's real," the teller shrugged. "He can send you another. We don't process suspicious checks, especially not for that amount." People in line turned to look. One man shook his head. Helen's face burned, but she didn't raise her voice. Didn't shout. She just stood there, staring at the shredder like it had swallowed something sacred. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The teller gestured lazily to the next person. "You can come back with the proper documents." Helen stepped away, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. She found a seat in the cold lobby and sat down stiffly. The vinyl chair felt harder than it should have. She hadn't cried in public since her husband's funeral. But right now, her eyes burned. She didn't care about the embarrassment. What hurt was the way that girl looked at her, like she couldn't possibly be connected to someone successful. Like the idea of someone like her receiving a $10,000 check was laughable. And that word, proper. She'd been proper all her life. The teller, Danielle, according to her nameplate, was now laughing with another customer, as if the last 10 minutes had never happened. Eventually, a manager appeared. Mid-40s. Navy suit. Shiny shoes. Helen stood up slowly. She wasn't sure if this man was going to help her, or humiliate her all over again. But the bank's lobby screen was still running its corporate client showcase, and a face was about to appear on it that would silence every doubt in the room. The manager didn't come to her. He leaned over Danielle's desk, whispered something, stole a glance in Helen's direction, but he never approached. Just gave a curt nod and disappeared behind a door marked staff only, the kind that closes quietly but feels like it's slamming in your face. Helen gripped her purse tighter. "Mom." The voice startled her. For a split second, she thought it was Anthony, but it was just a little girl, maybe 6, walking hand in hand with her mother. The girl gave Helen a soft smile, a tiny wave. "Don't bother her, baby," the mother whispered, gently pulling her away. Helen forced a smile, the kind that hurts. It reminded her of the cold Saturday mornings on metal bleachers, watching Anthony at soccer practice, holding lukewarm coffee and cheering him on even when he missed. She'd do it all again without question. She looked around the lobby, searching for anything to anchor her spiraling thoughts. That's when her eyes landed on the massive digital screen near the bank entrance, the one usually filled with dull slides about local events and business partners. But this time, the screen made her heart jolt. There he was, Anthony Bradford, her son, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, standing behind a podium, speaking at a summit. The caption read, "Bradford Solutions CEO Anthony Bradford speaks at the Gateway Economic Inclusion Summit, presented by First Guardian Bank." Helen leaned forward in her chair. Was she imagining it? But the image stayed. Then another slide, Anthony shaking hands with the mayor. Another, Bradford Solutions logo right beside the bank's. A partnership announcement. The silence around her was breaking. A woman near the front gasped and pointed. "Wait, is that the guy from the check?" She whispered to the man beside her. He nodded. "Yeah, that's him." The whispers rippled through the room. Danielle, still behind her counter, turned to the screen. Her eyes widened. Her fingers froze above her keyboard. And then the air shifted. The manager who had ignored Helen earlier now burst out of his office, no longer calm, no longer composed. "Mrs. Bradford," he called, hurrying toward her. Helen looked up. "Yes, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding. Could we speak in my office, please?" Behind him, Danielle looked ghostly pale. Helen didn't rise right away. Her legs were shaky, but her spine was iron. "I asked to speak to a manager 30 minutes ago," she said, just loud enough for others to hear. The manager winced. "Yes, ma'am. I sincerely apologize. Please." But this wasn't just about an apology anymore. What had been dismissed as a scam had become undeniable. Truth was now glowing 10 feet tall on a wall for everyone to see. Helen followed him, Stephen Greer, his nameplate said, into his glass-walled office. She stood instead of sitting. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "Please, Mrs. Bradford," he said, gesturing toward the chair. "I'm deeply sorry about what happened." Helen sat slowly, folded her hands in her lap. "Are you sorry it happened, or sorry my son's face showed up on your screen?" Greer flushed. "Well, both, I suppose. But mostly, I'm just embarrassed. That's not how we treat customers. Especially loyal ones like yourself." She didn't say anything. He shifted uncomfortably. "Danielle, the teller, is fairly new. Only been here a few months. But we'll be taking internal steps. I promise you that." She shredded the check, Helen said evenly. "Didn't ask for ID. Didn't call to verify it. Just assumed I was lying." Greer opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked down at his hands. "You know what that check meant," she continued, her voice as steady as ever. "It was from my son. The same man your bank is so proud to call a partner. I raised him by myself. Worked 3 jobs some years. And today, I stood at that counter while your employee made me feel like I didn't belong." Greer nodded, fast. "You're absolutely right. That never should have happened. Helen exhaled and leaned back just slightly. "Now imagine," she said, her voice soft but sharp, "how she treats someone who doesn't have a son featured on your lobby wall." Greer looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. "I'll call the central office," he said quickly. "We'll replace the funds immediately, in full, if your son can just—" "I don't need you to fix the money," Helen interrupted. "I need you to fix the thinking." Silence. The kind that lingers. Outside the glass walls, murmurs moved across the room. A man in line typed furiously on his phone. Someone at the teller window glanced over, shaking their head. And then, the desk phone rang. Greer picked it up, listened briefly, then looked at Helen, almost startled. "It's corporate," he said quietly. "They've already heard." He turned slightly in his chair, cupped the receiver with one hand, and began speaking in hushed tones. But Helen didn't care what was being said behind the glass anymore. Because what she came in with wasn't just a check. It was proof. "I'm with Mrs. Bradford now. Yes, she's here. I understand." When the call ended, Stephen Greer hung up the receiver and forced a strained smile. "They'll be reaching out directly." Helen gave a quiet nod, still composed. "Good. I'll let my son know." Greer stiffened slightly. "We truly hope this doesn't affect our relationship with Mr. Bradford." Helen stood slowly, adjusting the strap on her purse. "That depends," she said, and without waiting for more, walked out of the office. As she stepped into the lobby again, the screen near the entrance was cycling back to Anthony's photo. His smile. His suit. The quote from his keynote, bold beneath his image. "We rise by lifting others. Progress means everyone, not just the privileged." No one missed the irony. Danielle's station was empty now. She was gone. Maybe in the back, maybe being coached, maybe just hiding. Helen didn't ask. She didn't care. She was reaching for the glass door when a voice called out behind her. "Mrs. Bradford?" It was a woman from the line earlier, the one who had recognized the name on the check. Her name tag read Teresa Delgado. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with kind eyes and decades of wear in her voice. "I just want to say I'm sorry," Teresa said gently. "That should have never happened. I've worked here 15 years. I've never seen anything like that." Helen offered a soft, tired smile. "Thank you." Teresa hesitated, then added, "Your son, he's doing amazing things. I saw his speech on YouTube. You raised a good man." Helen's eyes watered for a second, but she blinked them clear. "I did my best." She walked to her car in silence. The drive home passed in a blur. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because the next morning, Anthony Bradford was on his way to that same bank. And he wasn't coming quietly. The sun had just climbed over the city skyline when Anthony pulled into the First Guardian parking lot in his slate gray Tesla. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just jeans, sneakers, and a navy windbreaker with a discreet Bradford Solutions logo on the chest. He looked like any man running errands on a Thursday morning. But the moment he walked through the doors, the air changed. Stephen Greer was already near the front, flanked by two staffers. They tried to look casual, but their eyes betrayed the truth. Nervous, alert, guilty. One of them had been scrolling Twitter since 7 a.m., where the incident had already begun making rounds. A blurry photo of the lobby screen with Anthony's face and the caption, "Imagine shredding this man's mother's check," while playing his promo video 5 feet away. It was getting traction. Fast. Anthony walked straight up to Greer, eyes steady. "You know why I'm here." Greer stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Bradford, first, let me say how deeply sorry we are for how your mother was treated. There's no excuse. We're currently—" Anthony didn't take the handshake. He looked past him, toward the teller counters. "Where's the woman who shredded the check?" Greer hesitated. "She's been placed on administrative leave, pending review." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Is that the same as fired?" "Not yet. We have to follow internal protocol. Anthony looked him dead in the eye. So your protocol protects her job before protecting your customer's dignity. The lobby grew still. A few customers were watching now, pretending not to. Greer tried again. Mr. Bradford, I know you're upset, but I assure you, I'm not upset, Anthony interrupted. Upset would be yelling. This is calculated. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to Greer. This is a list of every organization my company partners with. They all bank with First Guardian. Greer scanned the paper, jaw tightening. If you want to keep those accounts, Anthony continued, your corporate office needs to issue a public apology. Today. Greer swallowed hard. We'll get this to them right away. And your staff. Anthony turned, his voice now addressing the whole room. They don't need diversity training. They need basic respect. An older man behind one of the desks stood up slowly. Mr. Bradford, if I may. I'm Arthur. Been here since this was a credit union. I'm ashamed of what happened yesterday. I've got grandkids. If someone treated my daughter like that, I'd be standing right where you are. Anthony nodded once. Thank you. Then came another voice, from behind the teller row. It was Teresa, the same woman who had spoken to Helen. She didn't even ask for ID, Teresa said softly. Helen's been banking here longer than I've worked here. And that girl looked at her like she was a criminal. Anthony took a deep breath. My mom has never bounced a check. Never taken a payday loan. Never once asked me for help. That check. He paused. That was the first time she said yes. The first time she let me give back a piece of what she gave me. He looked at Greer again. And your teller shredded it like it was nothing. Silence stretched through the lobby. Heavy. You can't undo what happened, Anthony said. But you can decide what kind of institution this is, or isn't. Greer's face was pale now, his hands tight on the paper Anthony had given him. He nodded, voice low. I'll contact corporate immediately. I'll tell them everything. Stephen Greer's voice was low, almost apologetic. Anthony's gaze didn't flinch. Good. Because if this happened to someone whose face is on your wall, what's happening to the people who aren't? And with that, he walked out. No cameras. No statements. Just quiet fury. But the internet wasn't finished. By 7 a.m., Anthony's phone was vibrating non-stop. His assistant had forwarded 5 interview requests, 3 local stations, 2 national. Overnight, the story had leapt beyond St. Louis. Not because Anthony Bradford was famous, but because it struck a nerve. It wasn't just a shredded check anymore. It was a mother. An assumption. A moment of routine humiliation that spoke to something much deeper. Anthony didn't reply to the interview requests. Not yet. Instead, he made one call. Morning, Ma, he said when she picked up. Morning, baby, Helen replied, her voice tired but warm. How you holding up? Anthony hesitated. I'm all right, but I've had better trips to the bank. She chuckled quietly. I'd imagine so. Then she grew still. I'm proud of you. But don't let this thing eat you up. You know how the world works. I do, Anthony said. And that's why I'm not letting this slide. A quiet pause. Then Helen sighed. You always were stubborn. Learned from the best. They hung up. Anthony drove to his office building in Clayton, but he never made it inside. Across the street, a small group had gathered, some holding signs, others just waiting. One woman held up cardboard with a handwritten message. I'm not a CEO. Would they shred my check too? Anthony didn't walk past them. He walked into a coffee shop nearby, opened his laptop, and began to write. He posted it to Bradford Solutions LinkedIn, then mirrored it on Facebook and Twitter. Yesterday, my 62-year-old mother was accused of fraud at a bank she's used for decades. She came in to deposit a check I sent her. $9,800 to help with home repairs. The teller shredded it without verifying her identity. An hour later, my face appeared on their digital screen as one of their featured clients. Think about that. He didn't tag the bank. He didn't have to. By noon, the post had over 6,000 shares. A local radio host read the post live on air. Callers flooded in. Some voiced outrage. Others shared their own stories. An elderly man recalled being denied a withdrawal because he didn't look like he had an account. A woman recounted being asked for utility bills to deposit $300, while the man in front of her walked out with $2,000 in cash and no questions. Anthony sat and listened, quietly, taking notes. That afternoon, a journalist from the St. Louis Dispatch reached out, not for a profile on Anthony, but a story on Helen. He agreed, but only if his mother did. So he called again. "Ma, there's a reporter who wants to talk to you." Helen exhaled on the other end. "Lord, I don't know if I'm built for all that." "You don't have to be," Anthony said. "Just talk like you talk to me." The next day, the article ran with the headline, "They didn't know her son was a CEO, but Helen Bradford's story speaks for thousands." Helen didn't grandstand. She didn't call names. She just told the truth. She described her lavender church dress, the look she was given, the moment the check disappeared into the shredder. And somehow, that quiet honesty hit harder than rage ever could. Local news picked it up. Then regional. Then national. On a morning talk show, a panel of anchors debated the incident. One of them asked, if her son wasn't a CEO, would we even be talking about this? By Friday night, First Guardian Bank posted a brief apology. "We deeply regret the incident involving Mrs. Helen Bradford and are reviewing all internal procedures to ensure respectful and fair treatment for every customer." But to many, it rang hollow. No mention of the shredded check. No mention of Anthony. And certainly no mention of Danielle. That night, Anthony's college friend Jared, now a legal analyst, called him. "You thinking lawsuit?" Anthony leaned back in his chair. "No, not yet. But it's blown up, man. Say the word." "That's why I have to handle it right," Anthony said quietly. "This isn't small anymore." And he was right. By Saturday, the story had outgrown any one person. Hashtag Helen Bradford was trending nationwide. Activists, journalists, financial watchdogs, even celebrities. They reposted the article, the photo, the quote. Some called it banking while black. Others wrote, they messed with the wrong mother. But Helen, she wasn't reading the comments. She wasn't watching the hashtags. She was in her kitchen, flour on her hands, baking cornbread for her neighbor's kid's birthday. The small TV on her counter played another segment about her story. Her name crawled across the bottom of the screen. She shook her head and murmured to no one in particular, "Lord have mercy. I just wanted to deposit a check." Helen's words still echoed in Anthony's mind. But it was too late to rewind any of it now. Across town, he was deep in the center of the storm. Calls from news stations, advocacy groups, even city council members. Everyone wanted a quote, a statement, a soundbite. That Monday, he met with his communications team in a small conference room, the blinds drawn tight. The air was thick, not panicked, but focused. Keisha Owens, his longtime PR manager, looked up from her notepad. "I know people want more from you," she said, "but what you've done so far, calm, clear, not angry, is what's hitting hardest." "You're not ranting," she added. "You're just telling the truth." Anthony nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to go viral. I'm trying to be heard." Keisha tapped her pen against the table. "Then let's be intentional. We choose one interview, one outlet, on our terms." Anthony considered that. "Not just about me." "No," she said. "About your mom. About how people without a face on a wall get treated worse. That night, they confirmed an exclusive sit-down with Channel 5 News, a local station known for its fairness. The interview was taped in Helen's living room. She sat in her favorite chair, framed by hand-sewn curtains she'd made 10 years ago. Her hands rested in her lap. Calm. Steady. Dana Wu, the interviewer, was soft-spoken but direct. "Mrs. Bradford," she said gently, "when you walked into that bank, did you expect anything like what happened?" Helen gave a faint smile. "No, baby. I wore my church dress, brought my ID. I thought I'd be in and out." "And when she shredded the check?" Dana asked. Helen looked down, then up again. "I thought, if this is what they think of me, what are they doing to folks who don't look like me? Don't sound like me? Folks without a clean dress and a CEO for a son." That clip aired that evening. By morning, it had over 3 million views. The bank's headquarters in Cincinnati scrambled. They issued a longer apology. This time, it mentioned Helen by name. Referred to the teller's role, though not her name. Promised an internal review and announced a customer respect initiative. But to most, it felt like a PR band-aid. People weren't buying it. Former customers began posting screenshots of their closed accounts. "If Helen's not safe banking here," one read, "then neither am I." A retired teacher in Missouri shared how she'd once been questioned trying to cash her pension check. A young mother in Arkansas wrote about being asked for 2 forms of ID, while her white coworker, standing beside her, wasn't asked for any. The stories poured in. Different cities, different banks, same pattern. Even a local newspaper in Indianapolis ran a headline, "Mrs. Bradford's experience isn't rare, and that's the problem." Anthony read them all. He didn't want his mother turned into a martyr or a meme. She was a person, a woman, a mother who deserved better. That's all. One evening, he sat with her on the porch, the sunset slicing gold across the rooftops. "You okay with all this?" he asked. Helen sipped her tea, watching the sky. "I didn't ask for it," she said. "But I reckon God puts you in the spotlight sometimes, whether you want it or not." She looked at him. "Just make sure it's not about me. Make it about what's broken." Anthony nodded. "That's the plan." Because every time the bank tried to patch a crack, more fractures appeared. Before the LinkedIn post, before the hashtags, before the headlines, there was just Helen, and a long road paved with ordinary days that required extraordinary strength. Anthony had grown up in a modest 2-bedroom on Bingham Avenue. His father died of heart failure when Anthony was 6. No warning, just laughter in the backyard one day and silence the next. Helen didn't fall apart, even though she had every right to. She picked up shifts, mornings at Roosevelt High as a custodian, nights cleaning offices downtown. Saturdays, she did hair in the kitchen for neighbors who couldn't afford a salon. There was always a pot of beans on the stove. Always a shirt drying over the radiator. Always order, even when they were barely holding on. Anthony remembered falling asleep on the couch waiting for her to come home, pretending he was still awake so she wouldn't feel guilty. But she always knew. One winter, the gas got shut off for 3 days. Helen boiled water on the stove, filled old pickle jars, and placed them at the foot of his bed to keep him warm. She never complained. Not once. "We're not poor," she used to say. "We're just temporarily out of options." Anthony never forgot that. When he got his first paid internship, he used the money to cover 3 months of her mortgage. Didn't say a word. She marched into the bank that Monday and asked who made the payment. "They said it was you," she told him later. She didn't cry in the bank. But that night, she hugged him tighter than she had in years. So when she called after the incident, her voice low, hesitant, it hit him like a brick. "I don't want to cause any fuss," she said. I don't understand how she could look at me and think I was lying." It wasn't about the money. It was about the look. That second of dismissal. That choice to treat her like she didn't belong. Anthony remembered being 12, driving with her to his piano recital, when a cop pulled them over. The officer asked if the car was hers. It was. She had the receipt in the glove box. But she still had to stand outside in the cold while they ran checks. Later, Anthony asked her why they treated her like that. Because, she said, some people need you to fit into a box. Makes it easier for them to ignore your story. Anthony had spent his life breaking out of that box, through scholarships, late nights, polished suits, and grit. And now, he was watching the woman who built that road for him being shoved right back into it. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. Anthony had a team combing through the bank's partnerships. Deshaun Avery, one of his senior managers, had quietly pulled internal records. In just 18 months, Bradford Solutions had generated over $1.2 million in commercial activity for First Guardian Bank. But none of that mattered. Not when Helen stepped up to that teller window. And that's what stuck with Anthony the most. His name, his company, his influence. None of it could protect her. She told him later, she didn't even blink, baby. Didn't look at the check. Didn't look at me. Just saw my face and decided. Nope. That fast. That simple. Anthony had spent days reflecting, not just on what happened, but how often it must have happened before. How many times had his mother endured that look? That tone. How many rooms had she exited with her back straight and her heart bruised, choosing grace over confrontation? He couldn't count them, because she never made them public. But now the world was watching. And Anthony felt it in his chest. This wasn't about a shredded check anymore. This was about change. And he owed her that. But while Anthony looked inward, the pressure outside kept rising. By Tuesday, First Guardian Bank was in full damage control mode. A formal statement hit every platform: Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and every inbox on their media list. We sincerely apologize to Mrs. Helen Bradford and the Bradford family for the unacceptable experience at our Bingham Avenue branch. We are committed to investigating the matter thoroughly and making necessary policy changes. It was longer than their first attempt. Polished, structured, and hollow. No names, no specifics, no real accountability. Anthony read it twice, then tossed his phone on the table. They're trying to say sorry without admitting what they did, he told Keisha Owens on a video call. They want people to feel better, without telling them why they should feel angry in the first place. Keisha sighed. They're dancing around legal liability. And falling flat doing it, Anthony replied. They've already said too little. Then came the leak. An anonymous employee from the Bingham branch had sent screenshots to a local watchdog blog. In an email to her supervisor, Danielle, the teller, wrote that she was acting in the bank's best interest, and that the check appeared suspicious because of the customer's demeanor and her inability to immediately verify the source. The blog published it with the headline, "The demeanor of a 62-year-old woman in a church dress?" It exploded. Comments poured in. The outrage was instant. People weren't just angry anymore. They were insulted. This wasn't just about shredding a check. This was about defending it afterwards, by painting a black grandmother in lavender as a threat. The bank's PR team scrambled. They tried deleting the post from their comment sections. Tried getting the blog to pull the screenshots. Too late. It had already gone viral. That same afternoon, Stephen Greer, the branch manager, was confronted outside the Bingham Avenue location by a local news reporter. He looked worn down, shoulders slumped, tie crooked. "We're working directly with Mrs. Bradford and her family," he said, blinking against the sun. "Our goal is to rebuild trust and ensure this never happens again." "Will the teller be terminated?" the reporter asked. Greer hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters." By dinner time, that clip was everywhere. No one was buying the vague apologies anymore. Customers began recording themselves closing their accounts, handing over debit cards with final words. "If you can't respect Helen, you don't get my money." Some brought flowers, cards, One little girl left a note in crayon. "Sorry they were mean. Your son must love you a lot." Anthony showed the photo to Helen. She stared at it for a moment. "I don't need all this attention," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to be famous." "You're not," Anthony told her. "You're finally being heard." Then came the board meeting. First Guardian's senior executives met behind closed doors. But one email leaked within hours, this time from Colin Darr, the regional director. The incident with Mrs. Bradford highlights shortcomings in our training, bias recognition, and frontline staff procedures. This reflects on all of us, and it cannot be brushed aside. It was the closest anyone had come to telling the truth. Still, it didn't come with a phone call. No one from corporate had reached out to Helen. No VP. No president. Not even a card. Anthony brought it up in an interview with the St. Louis Chronicle. "My mother was disrespected in person. She deserves to be respected in person." That quote hit hard. It spread fast. By Thursday, a senior VP from First Guardian finally reached out, requesting a face-to-face meeting. Anthony declined. "You can email your apology," he said. "Or better yet, send it to every customer who's ever been quietly dismissed." Because this wasn't about public pressure anymore. It was about private patterns that had gone unchecked for too long. The system had been whispering for years. Now, finally, someone was listening. It wasn't just about a check anymore. It was about who looked like they deserved one. The more First Guardian Bank tried to contain the fallout, the more obvious it became. The damage wasn't just public. It was personal. By Friday morning, what began as a local injustice had grown into something else entirely. A reckoning. Not with torches. Not with riots. But with stories. With names. With voices. Dozens of residents across St. Louis, and beyond, began to speak up. Some anonymously. Others proudly, with their full names and faces. Brenda Milton, a 72-year-old retired nurse, posted a trembling video to Facebook. "They said my check was probably stolen because the signature didn't match. But the man who wrote it was my brother. He signed it in front of me." Desmond Lee, a barber, tweeted, "Denied my SBA loan during COVID. 2 months of promises. Then nothing. I walked away feeling like a beggar." At a church on Arsenal Street, during a town hall organized by local leaders, an Iraq War veteran stood up. Troy Nivens, soft-spoken but unwavering. "I saved money fighting for this country. Thought that was enough to get a basic account. Guess my mistake was thinking I could walk in without a suit and still be treated fairly." The stories weren't new. What shook people was how familiar they sounded. Assumptions. Doubt. Dismissal. Polite condescension wrapped up in corporate policy. The common thread wasn't just race. It was institutional arrogance. This quiet entitlement of deciding who looked like they belonged. At that town hall, someone in the crowd asked if Helen would speak. Anthony shook his head gently. "She doesn't want a spotlight," he said. "She just wants the next person who walks in with a check and a smile to be treated like they matter." He didn't need to say more. A community organizer, Paula Red, stood up after him. Her voice was steady. "This isn't just about Helen Bradford. It's about the woman behind her in line. The teen opening his first savings account. The elderly man who feels ashamed for asking questions. It's about them." Silence hung in the room. Then applause. Then a standing ovation. Not because the problem was solved, but because someone finally named it. Meanwhile, First Guardian Bank's executives scrambled behind the scenes, calling nonprofits, city leaders, anyone who might help broker peace. They scheduled listening sessions, announced restorative workshops, offered to meet with activists. But trust doesn't work on a timeline. People didn't want meetings. They wanted proof. They wanted change. Real. Visible. Permanent. That weekend, Anthony received an email from a high school teacher in Kansas City. I shared your story in my civics class. One student asked, what if her son wasn't famous? That question stuck with me. Thank you for making us ask it. He read the email twice, then walked into his mother's kitchen. Helen was folding laundry. The news was playing, muted. Did you ever think something like this would happen? Anthony asked. Helen shrugged, calm. Not like this, but I always knew my day would come. He looked up. What do you mean? She kept folding. Every person who's been stepped on quietly, we all wonder if anyone will ever notice. This was my day. I just didn't expect it to be about a check. Outside, the porch light flicked on. A few neighbors walked by, talking in soft voices. Someone waved. Helen waved back. Her street hadn't changed. Her home hadn't changed. But now, her voice lived far beyond her zip code. That night, a podcast titled The Price of Being Believed featured Helen's story. One of the hosts asked, how many Helen Bradfords walk into banks every day and get ignored because they didn't bring a microphone? The question didn't feel new, but it felt true. And now, with a city listening, Anthony knew the real challenge wasn't going viral. It was making sure people stopped whispering and started believing. 2 weeks after the incident, Helen Bradford stood in front of a small group at the Chippewa Street Community Center. She hadn't come to give a speech. She didn't want a spotlight. This wasn't a press event or protest. It was something quieter, but just as urgent. A financial literacy workshop for seniors, organized by Anthony with a few volunteers and local credit unions. The goal was simple: make banking safer, kinder, and more accessible for the people like his mother. The ones who'd spent a lifetime budgeting, saving, doing the right thing, and still being overlooked in a world built for speed and suspicion. Helen didn't read a speech. She gave a memory. When I was 23, she began, I got denied for my first checking account. No explanation. Just said I wasn't eligible. I had a job. I had ID. I didn't argue. I just left. Thought maybe that's how things worked. She paused, glancing around the room. Turns out, that's not how things work. That's just how some people get treated. And if you never speak up, they keep treating you that way. The room fell quiet. Then, slowly, a clap from the back. Then, another. Not loud. Not showy. Just honest. Later, a young volunteer named Marla approached Anthony. I brought my grandma today, she said. She's never trusted banks. Keeps her money in an envelope. But after hearing your mom, she's thinking about giving it another try. Anthony smiled. That's all we're trying to do, he said. Restore a little faith. Helen never asked to become a symbol, but she accepted the role with the same quiet strength that had carried her for decades. She declined the cable interviews. She turned down the national panels. But she did agree to help with a city-led effort to address bias in banking. She spoke when it mattered, calmly, clearly, and only when it might help someone else. Meanwhile, First Guardian Bank tried to salvage what it could. Customer retention dropped by 14% in 1 quarter. The Bingham Avenue branch faced a spike in account closures. The corporate office scrambled, rolling out emergency bias training, rewriting teller protocols, even offering Helen a private settlement. She turned it down. Instead, Anthony and Helen started something of their own. The Bradford Fund. No big office. No viral launch. Just 2 rooms above a barbershop in South St. Louis. A coffee machine. A printer. A purpose. A foundation built for everyday people. To fund financial literacy, provide small grants, and support seniors who had been dismissed, overlooked, or quietly hurt by institutions that claimed to serve them. In just 6 months, 80+ individuals opened accounts with community-centered banks. 50 bank staff completed Dignity First training. A hotline for elder financial abuse was launched. Helen worked part-time, 2 days a week. No title on her name tag, just Helen. She folded letters, made tea, listened. "You don't have to fight loud," she'd say. "You just have to be right." Anthony continued running his clean energy company, but every Thursday afternoon, he came back to the foundation. He spoke at schools, churches, and conferences. Not just about his mother, but about how bias lives in the small moments, in what we question, in who we doubt, in who we think deserves a second glance. And he always ended with the same line: "My mom didn't ask to be treated special. She asked to be treated normal." And that says everything. The bank never fully recovered. And Helen never looked back. She had a garden to tend, letters to fold, and, sometimes, a young person to encourage. Because in the end, what began with a check shredded in silence became a call heard around the country. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. So if you've ever been dismissed, felt small in a room you belonged in, been asked to prove yourself in ways others never had to, remember Helen. Remember her lavender dress, her stillness, her grace, and her quiet power that changed everything. Don't let the moment pass in silence. And if this story moved you, take a second not just to share it, but to stand by it. Because Helen Bradford's story may be unique, but it could just as easily be yours.